Here's a fun game. Find a Nintendo fan, ask what their favorite Super Smash Bros. Game is, and then look at them funny. You'll probably get one of 3 responses. If they say Smash 64 or Smash 4, run away. But they might say they enjoy Super Smash Bros. Melee for its rich legacy as a competitive esport, or Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for its sheer scope as the culmination of the entire series. Or, in a near unintelligible mumble, they might say Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Now you've hit the jackpot. You've found someone who owns Gangnam Style on CD, who has strong opinions about the Nintendo DS, whose 2022 Game of the Year was probably Kirby and the Forgotten Land. You found the Brawl enjoyer. This game entrances with its unique texture, and let's not beat around the bush here. If someone says they like Super Smash Bros. Brawl in 2023, what they mean is that they like the Subspace Emissary. This single-player sub-game, only one of many selling points of Brawl when it was new, has thoroughly become the game's identity in the shadow of its successors. This makes sense. The Subspace Emissary is supremely interesting. It's weird, it's janky, it's tiny, it's huge, it's a game whose most devoted fans usually don't like playing it. It is to date the furthest step in one man's career-long journey to answer the question, what if platformers were fighting games? The Subspace Emissary is the second most expensive work of video game fanfiction ever created, a kind of extreme fan service that leaves not a word left for itself. Brawl is and will always be the biggest video game crossover event of 2008, a game so obviously of its time, yet that still lies buried beneath ours. There can never be something like it again. So here's where we're at. In part 1, we talk about the 2008 video game Super Smash Bros. Brawl. In part 2, we choose a difficulty setting. In part 3, we analyze the Subspace Emissary, and in part 4, we cut to the heart of its enduring appeal. From there, all that's left is to tie up any loose ends. Let's start at the beginning.
And now you say, you want a revolution? Well, we've got one. One or two Wi-Fi games will be ready for launch. And I am pushing our team to make sure Smash Brothers is one of them.
Satoru Iwata is bluffing. At this time, the development team for a new Super Smash Bros. Game consists of 0 people. But hey, it's E3 and Nintendo's revealing a new console. They have one goal, and that's to land a reaction like this. Of all the voices in that theater, none are quite as surprised by the announcement as one Masahiro Sakurai, director of Kirby Superstar, Super Smash Bros., and Super Smash Bros. Melee, among others. He's actually not in the audience right now, he has to be told the news later. Throughout the convention, he has excited people going up to him on the show floor asking about the new game. While Sakurai directed the first 2 Super Smash Bros. Games at HAL Laboratory, at this point he's 2 years into his new life as a freelancer. Iwata, who was once Sakurai's boss at HAL in the 90s, had assured him that if a 3rd game ever entered production, he'd at least be made aware. But with that not actually having happened yet, Sakurai knows just as little as anyone else. Later in that very E3, Iwata invites him to a private meeting on the top floor of a Los Angeles hotel. There's going to be a new Super Smash Bros. We have no concrete plans. Will you be involved? Sakurai is already entertaining multiple offers for work at this point. Smash Bros. Would be no small project. If he accepts, this game will likely be his life for the next few years. Iwata drives a tough bargain. You're the one who made Smash Bros. Possible in the first place. If you say no, we might not be able to pull this off. We'd probably have to do something boring, like remake Super Smash Bros. Melee with online multiplayer. And on that night, Nintendo secured a game director for Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Enter Game Arts, a studio that had just wrapped development on Grandia 3 and would form the first members of a new dev team built specifically for this one game. Brawl would be backed by a core team hired from across Japan's video game industry, a litany of external support studios, and music arrangements contributed by a who's who of beloved game composers, all in Nintendo's demand to create the biggest video game crossover event yet known. Brawl's marketing campaign molded the growing internet like clay, constantly revealing glimpses of a work simply too big to ignore. Expectations were monumental. Only one question remained: would the game deliver? Course it would. Fucking stupid? What, would Super Smash Bros. Brawl just not establish itself as the central pillar of Nintendo fan culture for 6 years? Get real. Hello gamers, and welcome to my hot new game review of Super Smash Bros. Brawl for the Wii. I camped outside GameStop for 3 solid nights, then broke in and stole my copy an hour before release, and I gotta say, this is the biggest video game crossover event of 2008. This shit's got more content than the Bible. It's got all your favorite characters all in one place. Melee had 25 characters, Brawl has 34, 35 if you count Yoshi. It's got Sonic the Hedgehog. These have got to be the best graphics we've seen on the Wii. This isn't your little 8-bit Mario getting high on mushrooms anymore. Do not let your 12-year-old play it. This time we have online multiplayer. You can play with all your friends during a pandemic. Sonic the Hedgehog is in it. There's classic mode, tournaments, a story, trophy horde. This game is a perfect 10, no question. I cannot wait for Super Smash Bros. 4, where hopefully we'll have like Midna or something. Bye gamers. The acclaim was overwhelming. It couldn't have been any other way. In time, however, the seams began to show. Why do these characters fall so slowly? What is it that I keep tripping over? What's this game's tier list like anyway? Brawl's secondary reputation after biggest video game crossover event of 2008 was of a game that it wasn't fun to be good at. The growing competitive community around its predecessor largely did not make the generational jump that everyone must have expected. People who would know better than me have made the argument that if not for Brawl's comprehensive failure as a proper competitive fighting game, the Super Smash Bros. Melee community would not exist at the scale it does today. You could dismiss Brawl's high-level failings as peripheral concerns. The tastes of tournament competitors don't necessarily correlate to those of your average player. Though, as an average player, you might find yourself staring at locked achievements like Clear All-Star on intense difficulty, and like seeing your low-angled reflection in a black cell phone screen come face to face with the fact that video games are not real life. In 2023, my most immediate takeaway from Brawl is that it looks like a video game from 2008. To be entirely clear, that's great. I love this aesthetic. The muted colors, the nondescript grasslands, the muddy textures. Why is that? Well, it's my nostalgia, simple as that. I played this game when I was very young, and returning to it brings back good memories. I don't contest this. But like, why? There are plenty of games I played as a kid that don't blast me with nearly as much past. Why is this one so potent? Brawl to me has its own flavor of nostalgia. I'd like to explore that. Do you know the parable of the Wind Waker? You've probably heard it before. Nintendo wants to build excitement for the GameCube and shows off this tantalizing footage of Link and Ganondorf rendered in never-before-seen detail. I hope I don't sound like a broken record by saying that this wasn't the reveal of a new installment in a critically acclaimed video game franchise. When said reveal did happen, it looked like this, and as the story goes, the world was enraged. This didn't look like a game of the future, this was just some kid with a boat. Thus Nintendo course corrects, putting out a second game with all the moody lighting and sad horses that contemporary gamers longed for. At last the people rejoice. Yet, as time marches on, the second game begins to show its age. The adoring fans move on as yet more refined and technologically advanced works threaten to render it obsolete. Inversely, that once cast-off game would seemingly never age at all. It doesn't happen all at once, but one by one people turn around on it, the one fresh apple in a dying orchard. What makes a game good on its release isn't always what will make a game good with decades of hindsight. Our collective public judgments don't always leave room for subtlety. Those who aim for realism, to climb to the level of a digital god, will one day be struck down. Those who strive to be nothing but the best version of themselves, while they may not be appreciated in their own lifetimes, will one day ascend to become timeless. In hindsight, we can see the backlash to the Wind Waker and eventual release of Twilight Princess as early manifestations of wider cultural shifts taking place in the 2000s. This decade would see the labels of casual and core gamers become extremely codified. In the school playgrounds of my childhood, rated M for mature became a badge of honor on par with a parental advisory sticker on a hip-hop album, while the barriers to entry for both playing and creating games were being torn down by, for instance, Adobe Flash. The AAA space doubled down on being real games for real gamers. Real games were expansive, serious, and cutting edge, or at least adopted the signifiers of such things. This manifested in the emblematic Browntown aesthetic of the PS3 and Xbox 360 generation. Meanwhile, the non-threatening, family-friendly Wii and Nintendo DS became massive hits with those so-called regular people, as Nintendo struggled to convince its most devoted fans that it could still wrestle with the big dogs. This is the delicate balance that Brawl had to walk. Smash Bros was fun for the whole family, though it was also fun for people who knew who Captain Falcon and Mr. Game & Watch were. Hence the more photorealistic art style. Brawl doesn't go full Lion King remake or anything, it keeps exactly as much stylization as you need for a crossover game about Nintendo characters, though they've all been coated with a fine layer of grit. This art direction feels so distinct today because we've moved on. As far back as at least Overwatch, we've mostly internalized that video games don't have to prove themselves anymore. Games can be colorful and still be taken seriously. Graphics that once sold themselves as cutting edge no longer are, and obviously so. The casual core divide has blurred and our tastes have mellowed out to such an extent that a game like Fortnite... You know what? Just hear me out here. Maybe Browntown was always cool and good. Look, I get it. The Wind Waker came out in 2002, and it still kinda looks like it could have been made in 2023, especially compared to most of what came out in the following decade. Cartoonish and stylized art ages well. But like, if I wanted to play something that looks modern, I'm not touching a GameCube game. Most new video games coming out in 2023 kinda look like they could have been made in 2023. I find charm in games that clearly push the graphical limits of now obsolete hardware, where you can tell exactly what kind of specs the developers were working with. The fact that they've aged poorly is the point. These are worlds too big for the hopelessly primitive boxes that contain them. They feel deeply human. I get genuine nostalgia from this type of game, even from ones I didn't actually play as a kid. What is childhood wonder if not the rough sketches of a reality just out of reach? The only difference with Brawl is just how jarring it is. Placing this cast of characters in the cartoon aesthetics of Super Mario Galaxy or even Super Smash Bros. Melee would have not only worked, but felt like a given. Their juxtaposition against photorealistic greenery, Latin choirs, and a post-apocalyptic Super Mario Bros. 1-1 reads as not only unnatural, but sort of as a parody. If I had to give just one reason why this game still resonates with me, it's that Brawl doesn't belong to its source material. Brawl makes its source material belong to it. As soon as you get your face on one of those rectangles, you're a Smash character first and that kid from Mother 3 second. While Melee's adventure mode is a whirlwind tour of existing game worlds, every level in the Subspace Emissary other than Skyworld and the Halberd is a fully original place. Out with Brinstar and Corneria, in with the Battlefield Fortress and the Path to the Ruins. You still get a few Goombas and Kooper Troopers, but they're joined by Flu, Bucculus, and Shady Az. Fayish. A person stuck in 2008 might call this generic. In 2023, I call it cool and based. Have you seen pop culture nowadays? Master Chief is in Fortnite, Rick and Morty are in Space Jam, Nagito Komaeda's inside my house. Just showing that you have the legal rights to use some fictional characters means nothing anymore. You have to actually create something new with them. If the appeal of a massive crossover project is all your favorite characters all in one place, I'd argue that the one place is as important as the favorite characters. Where other such media feels like reading the quarterly reports of an entertainment company, Brawl boldly declares that the Mario, Legend of Zelda, Kirby, Pokemon, Metal Gear Solid, and real-life franchises coexist in not only a shared universe, but a single weird continent. Pit doesn't just get to meet Mario through a comfortably non-canon interdimensional portal or something, he's the guy's biggest fan and retweets every single one of his hot takes. Unraveling the lore implications of all of this is at least as fun as playing the Subspace Emissary. I'd like to do the former in due time, but for now, we should start playing the Subspace Emissary. Immediately after starting a new game, before any scenes are cut to or any characters are chosen, the Subspace Emissary presents the player with a complex moral choice in its 5-pronged pitchfork of difficulty options. Choosing a difficulty setting is of course the most difficult part of playing any video game. When I was a kid, I always picked easy due to my deep-rooted fear of the unknown. Nowadays, I play most games on the normal or medium settings because I'm a normal and medium person. In this case though, I'm immediately suspicious of the presence of 3 times as many hard options as easy options. Maybe hard is actually the real medium setting, and this is the developer's way of offsetting the stigma around playing on a lower difficulty. And hey, I'd love to use this video as an opportunity to get better at Smash, and a harder setting will pile on some of that pressure. But my personality is one that's rather prone to getting easily frustrated. I don't want to have to play through this game in a bad mood, that's not helpful for anyone. But harder games tend to reveal more of themselves and demand further engagement, which would probably lead to a more insightful video. Though only to a point. Make a game too hard and it stops being itself and exposes the cracks in its design, which admittedly could also be interesting in its own way. Personally, it'd be easier to edit this if I didn't have to sit through a bunch of footage of me failing the same level over and over, but personally, I want to look like a big tough guy on the internet. After weighing these factors and several others, I chose to play on hard, because it's in the middle. But which one should you pick? The answer may surprise you! The central dilemma here is that you're given this choice before seeing any aspect of the game whatsoever. For some players, they haven't seen any gameplay of Brawl as a whole. Luckily for us, I've not only made a video about this game, I've also played it. So let's set some definitions. The Subspace Emissary is a 2D action platformer made out of a fighting game. This is weird on premise alone. Or is it? Smash itself is a fighting game made out of a 2D action platformer. I'd argue it's made out of one very specific 2D action platformer, Kirby Superstar. Kirby Superstar's copy abilities themselves took inspiration from the movesets of fighting games. Rather than having one button do one specific thing at all times, actions were contextual in ways that could be learned or intuited. Superstar milks as much variety as it can out of a single button. This would eventually become a core part of the Kirby series as a whole, though it would take some time. After Superstar, Masahiro Sakurai left the Kirby series to direct Super Smash Bros., a fighting game with all the mobility of a platformer. 4 years later, Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards would be the last new game from the Kirby series' other game director, Shinichi Shinomura, a man whom we literally know nothing about. What followed for Kirby was a period of experimentation and cancelled projects that would not bear fruit until Kirby's return to Dreamland in 2011. The 2000s was the decade without a Kirby game. This is my world record submission for most caveat-filled yet meaningful sentence. Caveat number 1, many other decades like the 1950s also didn't have Kirby games. Caveat number 2, Kirby 64 released in 2000, meaning you have to be one of those people who insist decades start on the years ending in 1. Caveat number 3, the HAL-developed spin-off games Kirby Air Ride and Kirby Canvas Curse were released within this decade. Caveat number 4, the flagship-developed Kirby and the Amazing Mirror and Kirby Squeak Squad were released within this decade. Caveat number 5, the HAL-developed remakes Kirby Nightmare and Dreamland and Kirby Superstar Ultra were released within this decade. Caveat number 6, I guess if we're starting the decade in 2001, then we'd have to count the Goodfield-developed spin-off game Kirby's Epic Yarn released in 2010. Caveat number 7, Super Smash Bros. Brawl is a Kirby game. So I've previously flirted with the idea that Kirby games aren't platformers. I don't even really feel right calling Amazing Mirror a platformer. You're not precisely navigating tricky jumps and deadly obstacles, you're more negotiating for space with enemies in sometimes restrictive environments. At its core, Kirby has a unique texture belonging to it alone. Kirby games are easy largely because they give you way too much health and are fairly tolerant of the player being a bumbling fool. Ultimately, they have to trust that you're here to have fun. Kirby games are improv comedy. Level design and enemy placement aren't obstacles but audience suggestions, and the copy ability system is our way of saying yes and. This back and forth can feel anywhere from pleasant to genuinely therapeutic. Kirby games are shaped like a friend. In the case of an AI uprising, they may be our only hope to establish peace between man and machine. This is totally at odds with the design philosophy of a typical platformer. Getting hit in Mario means you either die or semi-permanently lose an important ability. The game asks in a condescending but ultimately kind-hearted way, why didn't you just not take damage. These games ask for perfection, whereas Kirby asks for good enough. Of course, the best Kirby games have systems versatile enough that they eventually can ask for perfection if that's what you're looking for. All action games just lie somewhere on this spectrum. On one end is Super Meat Boy, and on the other end is Super Smash Bros. Brawl. The Subspace Emissary is the attempted re-Kirbification of Super Smash Bros. I mean, Kirby's even the first character you play as unless you're uniquely boring. More than that, turning Smash into a side-scroller is basically going full circle. It's easy to compare Subspace to a more standard platformer and conclude that it's a failed concept, that you can't just drop a fighting game character into a platformer and expect it to work automatically, but doing so ignores both the game's lineage and the fact that the developers really did treat this genre shift delicately. The game's physics are all tweaked to rein in the rough edges. Your jump arc now matches closer with Mario or Melee than with the base game. This gameplay really did have a lot going for it, and in some ways it succeeds at what it's going for. Brawl's character roster is effectively repurposed as a stand-in for Kirby's copy abilities. One of the biggest advantages of the copy ability system is how it edges you towards finding a favorite ability that feels like your own personal discovery. That would be a really cool thing for a fighting game single-player mode to be able to do, and Subspace has succeeded in this regard in my own recent playthrough alone. I've gravitated toward a few Smash characters over the years, and I'm happy to say I've added one more. This guy. Pikachu is a little yellow guy. He's certified noob friendly. So many of his attacks are useful in these obvious and distinct ways. He's tough, he's incredibly mobile, and he is my son. I look forward to picking him every time I play any Smash Bros. Game from now on. That being said, the Subspace Emissary doesn't quite reach the full improvisatory joy of copy abilities. Subspace levels are all first played using a set group of characters and then can be revisited using any character the player chooses. While Kirby can use level design and optional secrets to nudge the player toward trying out different abilities in an environment of carefree experimentation, in Subspace, as in life, you're stuck as who you are until you die. We can't even really have level design too tailored to one character's abilities, which is a shame when the variety and diversity of said characters is Brawl's main selling point. The Subspace Emissary never fully escapes the shackles of its fighting game parent. Where Kirby games feel like playing Flappy Bird on the moon, Smash's weighty double and triple jumps here feel like swimming upstream with 7 babies in your arms. Do you ever just play an indoor level and realize the game forgot to give you a way to die? I already feel like some Kirby abilities just go too far with how many moves and variations they involve, but a full Smash moveset, while beautifully minimalist in the context of a fighting game, is unnecessarily elaborate for simple AI enemies with basic health bars. Should I use a tilt, a side smash, an up smash, a special? Who knows? In most cases, it really doesn't matter. Look, I know I'm bad at Smash Bros, and I'm not just saying that defensively because I've made the inherently embarrassing move of publicly sharing my gameplay in a YouTube video. I've realized that being bad at Smash Bros is a normal and standard way of playing the game. Being better at Super Smash Bros. Brawl would not make it more fun, that's why we still hold Melee tournaments. The Subspace Emissary lacks the finesse to make taking damage feel like your fault. Its idea of difficulty is mostly just adding more enemies with more health. I checked if any video game challenge run YouTubers had tried beating the game damageless on intense difficulty. It would probably be a very boring challenge to go through, though perhaps a fun one to watch a video about. The closest I could find was an outdated Project M task that doesn't hold a candle in entertainment value to repeatedly launching yourself across the screen with explosives. In conclusion, you should play on easy. What you're watching is my third long-winded video nightmare about an old game. While the worlds of Kirby and the Amazing Mirror and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask share a hub-and-spoke structure with varying degrees of open-endedness, the Subspace Emissary takes the more traditional approach of dividing itself into an ordered list of 30 levels. This is part of why I wanted to analyze this game. As a real gamer and true Smash Bros. Fan, I can't say no to a list of at least 20 items. In other words, I want to talk about the level design. Okay, some of you might be on the edge of your standing desks realizing that I forgot to list one level. For the rest of the segment, we have to pretend that doesn't exist. If you've played this game, you know why. I like to be thorough and complete to an extent that surpasses mortal comprehension, even my own, but this is a special case. If you want to hear me talk about that level, I promise that I can eventually grant your wish, but be aware that you and I will both need to deal with the consequences. For now, put it out of your mind. There are 30 levels in the Subspace Emissary. In other words, I want to talk about the level design. Wait, one more thing. Under no circumstances should you confuse the lakeshore with the lake. The lakeshore is the shore to a completely different lake. The path to the ruins does actually lead to the ruins, but that's not to be confused with the ancient ruins that you go outside of. Totally separate ruins, and the research facility, the wilds, the subspace bomb factory, and subspace each refer to 2 distinct levels each with the exact same name. There are 7 components of a Subspace Emissary level. By far the most prevalent of these are open traversal segments. Most of these are your average Kirby level design, unique level gimmicks with interesting terrain and plenty of enemies to deal with. You can call them platforming stages if you really have to, though tricky jumps and bottomless pits are rarely the focus. Where Subspace differs from Kirby is that sometimes you're given nothing but a flat, nondescript pathway filled with enemies. The level designers lean hard on combat encounters to pad out these stages, which at their most heavy-handed manifest as our second and third components, ambushes and auto-scrollers. These are really more subcomponents of level traversal. Every what feels like too often, the camera will lock in place and refuse to budge until you take down a horde of enemies. This is the one thing in the way of being able to play through most of the game as a pacifist. It's the designers saying, no, really, you need to fight something, we wouldn't have a game otherwise. Meanwhile, auto-scroller segments can actually be pretty fun at times. There are 2 types of auto-scrollers. Type A is don't get left behind by the camera, and Type B is go for a ride. Type A contains some of the few genuine non-combat focused platforming challenges in the game, while Type B is at best another kind of ambush and at worst a glorified loading screen. When the Subspace Emissary isn't being a 2D side-scroller, it's setting up plot-relevant fights that are completely standalone within single-screen arenas. For the sake of completeness, our 4th component is something I don't have a good name for, and SSB Wiki refers to only as battles with subspace armies. WUSA for short. These are functionally identical to ambushes, except presented in isolation, contextualized through cutscenes, and where the player is shown how many enemies are left. Being a part of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, the Subspace Emissary sometimes also asks you to take part in a game of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. By default, the game's best segments, these come recommended to any fan of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Finally, boss fights are the most handcrafted of Subspace's content. They're always interesting, usually fun, and in exactly one case, great. With cutscenes as our 7th and final component, that's all of the Subspace Emissary, at least everything inside the levels themselves. Here's how they balanced out in my own hard mode playthrough. As you can see, it's about half and half between free traversal and everything else. The fact that brawls accounted for slightly more time than ambushes is wild to me. In short, ambushes happen so frequently and are such buzzkills that despite individually not taking that long, they feel like way more of the game than they are. Here, this is the full chart of my playthrough. There's a lot of short red lines. Small note about how I measured this, I'm not including any time spent in optional rooms or any time spent redoing segments, whether that was for recovering from a game over or going back for treasure I missed. If you must know, I got 6 total game overs plus 5 more in. This chart still carries the inherent subjectivity of a video game playthrough, sections that I got through unusually quickly or slowly, but hopefully it shows a general idea of the patterns behind Subspace's level design. The main pattern is that there is no pattern. These levels vary wildly in both length and contents. No one level has all 7 of our components, and no component except cutscenes are in all 30 levels. Even things like starting and ending a level with the cutscene aren't constant. The Ruined Hall is the shortest level. It's just one fight repeating the boss of the previous level but with new characters. The game has an internal rule where it never shifts between 2 separate teams of characters mid-level, which explains some of these weird divides. Several of the longest levels are those involving Samus. They're non-linear side-scrollers with lock and key level design. That's cute. They have shiny orange arrows telling you exactly where to go next at all times. Also, the plane lives up to its name. But if you want to isolate one level that's representative of the entire game, eat my ass, that's impossible. If all you want is the closest thing Subspace has to an average level, my money's on level 6, the lake. This can act as our case study. Let's dive in. We open on Diddy Kong, who we last saw 2 levels ago in the jungle. He gets in trouble like a baby because it lets Fox McCloud look cool saving him. This is how several characters get introduced in the Subspace Emissary. We're unwrapping our new toys, and if they don't make everything we already own look like dirt, it'll be Uncle Reginald who gets thrown in the trash on December 26th. Rayquaza's boss fight is easy. This is still pretty early in the game, but it's easy in a uniquely Subspace sort of way. There are all sorts of ways to take damage, but any attacks with significant knockback are mostly pretty trivial to dodge. Good enoughism is high here. It really doesn't matter whether or not you avoid these electric attacks. The truth is made crystal clear that you and Rayquaza aren't actually playing the same game. Contrast this with, say, Meta Ridley, the best and last regular boss in the Subspace Emissary. He gets to actually interact with the battlefield itself in ways that pose clear and immediate threats. He's a Super Smash Bros. Boss through and through. If you ask me, more fights should have worked exactly like this. Taking down Rayquaza with your attack button of choice, we get a wacky character moment and then proceed to the level proper. The lake's big gimmick is ripped straight from Kirby Superstar. They're doors that switch between the 4 seasons, or in this case, between 2 slightly different lighting conditions. This first iteration of the concept is simple. You progress until the next dead end, go through a door, and repeat. Then we get ever so slightly Metroidvania-esque. This red door takes you to hell. Switch to the other map, I'm sorry, you're still going to hell. But on the second map, we have access to, well, the one least representative aspect of the lake. It's one and only ambush. Winning the fight opens up a button on the first map, then you can proceed through either red door. And that's it for the yellow and blue doors. They appear nowhere else in all 30 levels. I think that's cool. The game introduces a new idea, shows off the mechanics and implications of that idea in as succinct a way as possible, and then throws it away. It doesn't try to be any more than what it is. The next section is a Type B auto-scroller and it's boring. On the way you can stop by an optional room. Brawl measures 100% completion through these gold boxes containing collectibles. Back in the first section with the doors, there's a place where you can double back and grab one if you're paying at least the slightest attention to your surroundings. Optional rooms always contain 1 gold box, typically just past a small set of obstacles. This one is on the more boring side, but a few later on get fairly creative. After we've automatically scrolled enough, our level wraps up with a straight ahead path of enemies before sudden unexplained Shadow Bowser fight. Since this is a video about the Subspace Emissary and not about Super Smash Bros. Brawl, I refuse to comment on this. Then there's another short cutscene and that concludes our average level. Again, this is only the center of a wide range of variations. To close out this segment, I'd like to give special attention to one of the outliers. There are 4 levels containing no traversal or platforming segments whatsoever. 2 of these are boss stages. One is a stub that exists purely for tying together 2 storylines. The 4th, and by far the longest, is also the first level in the game, Mid-Air Stadium. Mid-Air Stadium is almost 60% cutscenes. That's not unheard of for the opening of a grand adventure, but I've watched enough game design YouTube to know that players should understand why a game is fun in the first 3 minutes. The Subspace Emissary is a special case being embedded within a larger game, but applying this logic, we see that why it's fun is 72% cutscenes, 15% brawls, and 13% fighting enemies. From the very start, the game isn't trying to kid itself. It knows why we're all here. Nobody cares about the gameplay of the Subspace Emissary. I've heard this echoed by many people who consider themselves the mode's biggest fans. What people love most about Subspace are the cutscenes. When Super Smash Bros. 4 decided to Super Smash Bros. Forgo a story mode, the developers' stated reasoning wasn't about any of the gameplay issues we've talked about in this video, but that people just looked up the cutscenes on YouTube. When Super Smash Bros. Ultimate gave us World of Light, which plays at least 10 times better than this, Subspace fans weren't satisfied. It playing well wasn't the point. I'm not making fun of these people. I'm one of these people. Brawl's cutscenes are great. Among the sea of big names connected with Super Smash Bros., Subspace's story was written by Kazushige Nojima, known in part for his work on the most expensive piece of video game fanfiction ever written. And I know it's not quite the subcultural battleground it used to be, but I feel like I have to step up in defense of video game cutscenes in general. People like to make the argument that if you're going to play a video game with so many cutscenes, you might as well just watch a movie. By that logic, if you're going to watch a movie, you might as well just go play a video game for the cutscenes. A game's story isn't suddenly non-interactive just because the plot progresses mostly through pre-rendered CG. There's more to storytelling than that. In an RPG, for instance, the party dynamics at play during generic monster fighting are as important to telling a good story as any dramatic, unavoidable character death. Sometimes the best way to convey something just isn't with button pressing, and that's both fine and cool. The Subspace Emissary is, as luck would have it, a story. I've checked with my legal team about this. It's got everything you need. Good guys, bad guys, sad guys, damsels in distress, beginning, middle, Olimar, the works. The story of Brawl is, in its cutscenes, told entirely without words. Falcon Punch doesn't count. Everyone is a silent protagonist. It's a style that works well when you're working with established characters, one we see the soul of today in games like Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Both despite this style and directly because of it, the Subspace Emissary's plot can be difficult to follow. I didn't understand what was going on as a kid, and I sorta still don't. A lot of nominally canon plot explanations that you'd read on a wiki actually originate from the Smash Bros. Website rather than the game directly. As mandated by having this huge a cast, the game switches between different groups of characters almost every stage, only all coming together at the very end. It's a lot to keep track of. What you're seeing here is actually a simplification. A more accurate overview would be something like this chart from the Smash Wiki. No matter how easily you wrap your head around it, or how you choose to represent it, the Subspace Emissary is a story where characters move from point A to point B. It's a story where things happen. Several events occur. In its wordlessness and constant shuffling around of chess pieces, when viewed critically, it can risk appearing somewhat paper-thin. Once you've untangled its plot like a pair of earbuds, you might be tempted to plug in and start listening for deeper meanings and subtext. What denomination is the Ancient Minister? Does he struggle to reconcile his adherence to Jesus Christ with his mission to blow up Castle DDD? I don't know, and I want answers. Please, why won't you say something? Hi, did you like that joke? I did too, now let me ruin it. So clearly the name Ancient Minister is supposed to invoke a political minister rather than any sort of religious leader. And if you looked at the Japanese, like obviously there wouldn't be that same discrepancy as there is in English. This is the exact type of thing I'd want to go all Mr. No Fun Allowed and write just a long text description, like clarifying like disclaimer and all that, and it would be on screen for too little time so you wouldn't be able to read it without pausing. It'd be really fun. It's just good stuff. So the Ancient Minister's name in Japanese is Inshanto Kyo, and if you look up Kyo in an English-Japanese dictionary, one of the definitions is in fact a historically specific term for a state minister. This completely satisfied me for around 5 seconds. We have Solid Snake, we have Sonic the Hedgehog, sure, throw in an Edo period bureaucrat, it's fine. But another, and in hindsight more relevant definition for Kyo is as an honorific suffix. Kyo is a common translation of the English title of Lord. Lord Farquaad in the Japanese version of Shrek is Farquaad Kyo. This implies the devastatingly important fact that ancient is this guy's name. Inshanto isn't like a common loanword you see in Japanese. It's supposed to be a bit exotic. In conclusion, I say we all just call him Lord Antiquarius. This is being a bit unfair. The Subspace Emissary isn't just an emotionless game of 2.5D chess. In fact, the Ancient Minister does go through a character arc that arguably forms the emotional core of the whole story. Detonating the subspace bombs require 2 Robs to give up their lives, which in time we see the Ancient Minister express sadness about until he reaches his breaking point and tries to rebel, but for the first time in the game he's completely powerless, and then wablango, he's actually the Rob, cruelly made to partake in the oppression of his own people, now finally breaking free. And there are more emotionally charged moments than just this. Pikachu is suffering. Do you see how much pain he's in? You can't take this back. There are wounds that a Pokemon Center can't heal. The kid from Mother 3 is sad. He gets better later in the story. Anyway, those are the 3 moments of narrative depth in the Subspace Emissary. I hope you enjoyed them. As John Carmack once said, and many others have fought bloody forum arguments over, story in a game is like a story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. The Subspace Emissary, in its constant character shuffling and freeze-frame introductions, fully downs the Kool-Aid of this ideology. Super Smash Bros. Brawl all story cutscenes full movie HD might as well be a supercut of the first 30 seconds of the top 100 videos on SmashBros.com. What I mean is that the Subspace Emissary feels chaste. What I want to know is, where's the sex? I'm not just talking about how Ganondorf never uses his sword and Lucario is basically anti-homeless architecture for furries. It goes further than that. Every character is this dressed up business suit version of themselves. They present their surface level identities and nothing more. These guys feel like they're on the clock. In a lot of cases, this clearly isn't the Subspace Emissary's fault. How many characters in Brawl would you say you relate to as people? Ness is a person. He has a fictional life consisting of a series of linearly occurring events which mold and define his self. Mario is ultimately a mascot. If you want a Mario timeline, you have to make one yourself or watch a YouTube video if you don't have much time. The horrifying truth is that every Mario game exists as a video game within every other Mario game. Chris Pratt is more canon to Super Mario 64 than Luigi is. Baby Mario is a paid crisis actor. The person-mascot dichotomy is really more of a spectrum. Mario is certainly near one extreme end, but even he gets some real characterization now and then, even if it's temporary. Invent just about any scale for understanding video games, and in the middle you'll find Kirby, who we can conceptualize here as a logo with some friends. Read enough pause screens and you can get a sense of Kirby's existence within a fairly fleshed out world with a developed canon. Kirby himself is simply a placeholder, a blank space in lieu of a protagonist, who loves his friends, hates the United States of America, and exists purely by virtue of the lives he touches. Meanwhile, Link is sort of a meta character inhabited by different people in different stories. He's the player surrogate, and what exactly the player is linked to is arbitrary by design. The silent protagonist is essentially the most abstracted form of fan service, carving out a piece of the fiction and giving it directly to us. Brawl's cast isn't just varied in aesthetics and complexity, but in their underlying purposes within their original contexts. In the interest of making these characters Smash Bros. Fighters first, and pieces of their source material second, Brawl has to either give Mario a voice or make Falco Lombardi shut up. It chooses the latter. This mascotification facilitates Brawl's characters existing together in one place, without demanding immediate answers to any of the questions that raises. Though, it's not as if those questions aren't raised at all. To us, the people who've loved the Subspace Emissary and the games it pulls from over all these years, are these characters truly silent? Or do you hear voices ring out inside your head? Hi, I'm Princess Peach. You might know me from Bowser's Castle. It looks like we've gotten ourselves into a real pickle. The one through line between anything you could possibly call a fictional character is our own need to see them as people, regardless of how much or how little they give us to work with. There aren't 5,000 YouTube videos theorizing possible Mario timelines just because Mario is a highly trafficked keyword. It's an inherent aspect of our humanity. Take a bunch of mascots, many of which we presumably have known and loved before, put them in one genuine place, and they may just refuse to not make us make them real. Just like that, Brawl shatters the wall between fan and creator. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate has 3 links. Super Smash Bros. Brawl only has 2 links, just one of which plays any real role in the Subspace Emissary, though really they're all links. When every character is a silent protagonist, no one of them can suffice as our point of view. We have to become the entire circus. We have to become the storyteller. If you need one piece of evidence as to the real strength of the Subspace Emissary's bare-bones story, it's that even Masahiro Sakurai felt the need to publish fanfiction of it within 3 months of Brawl's Japanese release. Edgier art style aside, none of these Nintendo characters are going to have sex. We have to have sex with them. With that, I'm retiring this analogy. So where does this leave us? Super Smash Bros. Brawl, this game that's destined to be the central pillar of Nintendo fan culture for 6 years, is Ultimately a game that invites us to engage with it not as spectators, but as participants in a creative process. I think that's beautiful, and I'm sure it comes with no darkly ironic twists whatsoever. The only possible conclusion we can draw is that the Subspace Emissary itself is not the most important part of the Subspace Emissary. Luckily, we've only arrived here after I've said pretty much everything I wanted to regarding the Subspace Emissary itself. This video is pretty much over. Except you may have realized I've been being a bit sussy. I made a promise a while back, didn't I? This is your final warning. I can't guarantee anything about the contents of part 5 of this video. You can either leave now having watched a fairly complete retrospective on 90% of the Subspace Emissary, or proceed into the unknown. The Great Maze is a 2D miniature open-world side-scroller inside a fighting game platformer inside a platformer fighting game. It's universally disliked. This final level makes up 20% of the entire game, consisting almost entirely of remixes of previous levels. Look, the yellow and blue doors are back. It's at this moment, after the Subspace Emissary exhausts itself of newness, that it becomes the exact sort of crossover that I dislike. Things we've already seen shoved together thoughtlessly, a subspace where the word creativity doesn't apply because creation is simply not occurring. You're fighting soulless shadows of the things you love, each in the same nondescript, reality-detached room that exists purely as a conduit for content. If you buy that Brawl is a parody of video games, The Great Maze is the part that a BuzzFeed article in 15 or so years will describe as predicting the future. It is a dystopia. Less abstractly, it's a symptom of a late-aughts video game culture that values hours of content above all else. The weird part, though, is that the Subspace Emissary isn't a standalone game. Not enough content was never a criticism Super Smash Bros. Brawl risked facing. In this context, The Great Maze just feels like an unwillingness to let something good die as a hero. The best justification for The Great Maze's existence is that it acts as a recap. You've reached the end of your journey, and now you have a chance to look back on all that's happened and everyone you've met. That would be convincing if not for the fact that the game just did this with the previous 2 levels. In Subspace and in Subspace, you're going around finding and saving every character for the final confrontation. It's very rare that you could simply excise an entire section of a game and wind up with something better requiring no further tweaks. This is one of those times. You could have Subspace 1, Subspace 2, and then Taboo. You know how I claimed there were only 3 thematically or emotionally poignant moments in the Subspace Emissary's story? Well, this might be the 4th. Potentially. In theory. Some have claimed. The idea of taboo, of course, is that which we as a culture reject on principle, fearing how even mere consideration of its acceptance would reflect back on us. The most common fan interpretation is that Taboo the character specifically represents social pressures to move past video games, to shun what others perceive as childish. In the spirit of Brawl's story being told by its players as much as by the game itself, I say we run with that. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret, and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. You've probably heard this quote thrown around before. It's by far the most enduring snippet from a 1946 essay by C.S. Lewis about writing stories for children. It's an essay that shows its age in many ways while remaining timeless in many others. Lewis takes aim at 1940s literary critics using adult as a blanket positive while dismissing anything childish on principle. The famous quote is part of his argument that just discarding one taste for another taste is by definition not growth, but only change. Lewis explains that he writes children's stories stories simply because it's the one tool from his belt of experiences that often best conveys his ideas. He criticizes authors who approach the genre from the angle of giving the people what they want, claiming that children are typically smart enough to see through that. Then he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, then he died. Anyway, back to Super Smash Bros. The sort of cynical meta-interpretation of the common fan interpretation of Taboo is that this Nintendo game is about how Nintendo games are cool and you should play more of them. I can admit there might be something to that. One huge difference between us today and Lewis in 1946 is that it's no longer that weird or creepy at all for adults to enjoy media that's for children. We live in the age of family entertainment. Somewhere on Bob Iger's laptop is an Excel spreadsheet containing the number of people who've had sex while watching Frozen 2, and it's an odd number. Yet that one quote lives on. We still quote it because it still addresses a genuine anxiety. The taboo persists. Perhaps we collectively haven't grown, but only changed. If the Super Smash Bros. Series has a theme, it's of creativity. While the framing device has faded in subsequent installments, the original game is very explicitly about a kid playing with toys of Nintendo characters and his imagination. To quote yet another poignant piece of writing, Crazy Hand's trophy description from Super Smash Bros. Melee, where the Master Hand loves to create, his alter ego is impulsive and destructive, consumed with that hollow feeling which comes from destroying your own creations. The Crazy Hand appears when a player clears obstacles quickly and the Master Hand's power is low. You only have one chance to defeat the Crazy Hand. That last sentence gets me every time. Crazy Hand might be an agent of destruction, but he and Master Hand are always evenly matched. They work together as a team. It's yin and yang. It might be only a slight stretch to say that Crazy Hand is a sort of destruction in aid of the creative process, killing your darlings, so to speak. Through this framing, Taboo is a more permanent threat. He fucks up that hand, deanimates every mascot, and can only be stopped by Sonic the Hedgehog. The villain of this story told by its players is a complete detachment from the creative process, a rejection of the childlike and indeed sometimes embarrassing play that can create entire worlds. To Taboo, these characters we love are best as unmoving statues, forever unchanging. We can look at them all we want, but they can't look back. We're over here, they're over there. Because this is a video game story where the good guys win, it doesn't last. I'm not claiming that the Subspace Emissary is responsible for every prominent Nintendo fan creation from 2008 to 2014, but I will at least say that Nintendo fan as an identity would shrivel and die without the continued existence of Super Smash Bros. We can't understand the Subspace Emissary without understanding the passion of its fandom. The 2000s saw the communal aspects of video game fandom in general become more wide-reaching. Games media had comment sections now. Video games became about us. Brawl's invitation to create was realized concretely and publicly by many people. You may have once heard a factoid along the lines of, "Did you know the longest work of literature in the English language is a Super Smash Bros. Fanfiction?" Like most statements, this isn't true. Maybe it was at one point, it's just impossible to verify that. The fanfic in question is the Subspace Emissary's World's Conquest, which at least used to be the world's longest work of fanfiction. I did not read all 4 million words of it for this video, but the fact that it sets an entire story arc in the world of Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, and remembers to type the accent mark in the word Pokemon gives it my personal seal of approval. Monstrously big aura spheres. What matters is that Smash fans got themselves busy in the wake of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. When the game's foundation failed to hold under the pressure of high-level competition, they gave us the monstrously huge mod Project M, later Project Plus. Preserved on YouTube are countless old Let's Plays, skits, and animations, complete with modern comments from people with very distorted views of the 2000s internet. I can't possibly go in depth about every one of Brawl's fan works, so I'll go in depth about exactly one. This is Brawl and the Family, a webcomic created by Matthew Taranto between 2008 and 2014. Aside from being a work I personally followed back in the day, Brawl and the Family is sort of a perfect stand-in for this era of Nintendo fandom. Its run lines up near perfectly with Brawl's heyday, starting in May 2008 and ending on the exact North American release date of Super Smash Bros. For 3DS. While practices like fanfiction thrive today and will outlive us all, the serialized video game webcomic definitively belongs to the past. The form's cultural relevance has not really survived into the age where nobody wants to go to someone's website. More than any of that, I single out Brawl and the Family because it's good. It has its ups and downs, jokes that work and jokes that fall flat, but not once in 6 years does it feel stagnant or unambitious. You can feel a strong love for both video games and the art of comic making itself. Being the kind of person I am, I was immediately overcome by a primal urge to sort all 600 comics into some bizarre classification scheme. The results were a mess, which is the way I like it. The 9 types of Brawl and the Family comic are: Brawl and the Family is primarily a comic about rearranging the worlds of video games in unexpected ways. Kirby swallows something and then something weird happens that also makes a bit of sense. I think this is really the core appeal of video game webcomics. Games are by their very construction artificial, defined by easily understandable rules. You can get a lot of humor out of trying to connect the dots. Maybe something that seems nonsensical actually has a reasonable explanation and logical consequences. You might complain that this is way too broad of a category that can pretty much encompass the entire comic. Yeah, this sort of ended up being a catch-all category for stuff that didn't fit anywhere else. Oopsie. This is the first type of joke anyone makes about a video game. Why don't Pokemon die? What's with Link breaking all those pots? I don't like these ones. It's just the what if category, except incomplete. Something in a video game doesn't make sense, and that's it. Actually, looking at what comics I put here, some of them might actually just belong in the what if category. Maybe some of what I put in that category should go here. These comics are less about the punchline and more outlets to express the personalities of certain characters. Usually this takes the form of Kirby just being the most precious child. Over the course of its run, Brawl and the Family's cast takes on a life of its own. In the spirit of its namesake, they become Brawl and the Family characters first and video game characters second. I had to make a call on where Captain Falcon being loud stopped being a joke about Super Smash Bros. And started being just its own thing. Where did I draw that line? I don't remember. Alright, here's where Brawl and the Family is most clearly a Smash Bros. Comic rather than just a comic about Nintendo games. Unraveling the implications of fictional worlds coexisting is more fun than playing almost any video game. This can be done more or less artfully. Sometimes the joke is literally just it's one game but then something from a different game happens, though other times the concept is taken a bit further. Every so often, Brawl and the Family wades into fanfiction territory with more long-form story arcs. The biggest of these is Cocoon Academy, a 10-part prequel about the characters' school lives. Aside from being cool endeavors on their own, they go a long way toward developing the cast's personalities and relationships. They're neat. Sometimes they review E3, I guess? Remember the frog suit in Mario 3? Isn't it annoying how that owl in Ocarina of Time just doesn't shut up? Do you ever, why what, the Mother 3? The fact that there are only 26 of these is why this comic is still remembered fondly today. Nah, I don't know. God, that fucking History of Nintendo song still gets stuck in my head today. Also, the Love Hotel thing is an urban myth. I like Brawl and the Family. I can appreciate its craft a lot more now than I ever could. Back then, to a lot of us, the idea of reading a comic that referenced Nintendo games at all was enough to get us on board. We just liked seeing our own passion for this stuff be reciprocated. And that's weird, right? I was in middle school when I discovered Brawl and the Family. I know for a fact that I could have had a conversation about, say, Pokemon with pretty much anyone in that school I'd ever possibly consider talking to. Like, come on, it's Pokemon. I didn't have most of those conversations. At that age, it's all too easy to feel alone, even in ways where you aren't. Seeing people online who liked the same things I liked as much as, if not more than, I liked them was a bit mind-blowing. Nowadays, it's trivial. When you grow accustomed to the social internet, the presence of others sharing your interests is something you start taking for granted. If you don't seek them out, some recommendation algorithm will find them for you. That might go toward explaining that embarrassing little chill I got every so often rereading Brawl in the Family. Maybe it's a punchline that doesn't quite land. Maybe it's a character's facial expression, or the phrasing of some dialogue. Maybe you see this is a musical comic and instinctively slam that next button even though you know that's the good shit. Then maybe you blink twice, shake yourself out of it, and move on. Or maybe you don't. When I said that the serialized video game webcomic has lost any cultural relevance, I wasn't being entirely accurate. The one context in which a modern person likely comes into contact with the art form is a comic like this, posted ironically to a faceless Instagram page under 7 layers of JPEG compression. A once significant aspect of how people engage with fandom has become a punchline. Works of fan culture like this ask a thorny question. Can you separate the art from the audience? Because the art sucks, and the audience definitely would have been me if I had been born just 2 or 3 years earlier. Or would it? Because despite what its decade of infamy may suggest, this comic was never popular with geeks or gamers in the year 2010. Within a rounding error, anyone who's ever laid eyes on it has done so under the context of, look how bad this is. Yet look at the comments under any one of these reposts and you'll see something less like a Neil Breen watch party and more like a crime scene. People go after this random webcomic with a passion normally reserved for felons in M&M shoes. We reject it on principle, fearing how even mere consideration of its acceptance would reflect back on us. Or, to put it more succinctly, it's cringe. We can't understand the Subspace Emissary without understanding our reactions to the passion of its fandom. Cringe culture, what is it? When someone uses that exact term, it's usually followed by the words "is dead," though what grave we're dancing on is seldom specified. Cringe culture can mean anything from the natural emotion of secondhand embarrassment, as accelerated by social media, to a very real form of monetized online harassment that is in fact best left 6 feet under. For our purposes, I'll broadly define cringe culture like this. For a time, it was considered the height of comedy to Google your own name followed by the hedgehog. Browse any discussion of Girls in Games 81 and you'll find an entire airport's worth of baggage. People hate it less so than they hate everything it represents. To the surprise of no one, commenters from the early years love to hone in on the detail that the webcomic's name has the word girl in it and the main character is a girl. Others, explicitly or otherwise, accuse the creator of being autistic. Possibly even more revealing is the one commenter who, completely unprompted, lets slip that they love to attend video game conventions, if only nobody referenced video games during them. We all have many faces. The face we show to strangers, to friends, to family. And below every mask, at our base level, is that face we show to Reddit threads about bad webcomics. All it takes for all of this is putting on a gamer t-shirt and referencing a 3-year-old meme. Except you may have realized I've been being a bit sussy. There's a reason for that. I just found him. By having watched this much of a YouTube video about Super Smash Bros., I can say that under all but the most gatekeeping of definitions, you are both a geek and a gamer. Though, really, what kind of person between the ages of 13 and 30 actually describes themselves that way? The more common default is to distance yourself. Yeah, I love playing video games and learning about video games, and I probably, at least to some extent, got a degree in computer science because of video games, but I'm not like a gamer. I love Undertale, I just hate the fandom. That's the essence of cringe culture. Love the sin, hate the sinner. The correct way to enjoy Frozen 2 is to consume it, enjoy it, and that's it. If you dare share that love with others, you might as well be doing the other part in public too. If, God forbid, you have the audacity to make a work your own and create something new with it, then you might as well just be asking me to project my insecurities onto you. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't any ideological war on geeks and gamers or whatever. We can't blame a televangelist for this. We did this to ourselves. It's just that some of us did this to others of us a whole lot more. The taboo hasn't gone anywhere. Or maybe it has. Cringe culture is dead after all, from what I've heard. I'm not throwing a Christmas party in March, this is a funeral. In recent years, the vitriolic reactions to G&G 81 have been joined by another sentiment. Man, those were the days. 2008 is the new retro, even for a lot of people too young to remember it. When the year is 2020 and we've lost the need for yet more excuses to be alone, our Caramel Dancin' Automaton covers are imbued with something more than simple nostalgia. Christmas only comes, at most, once a year. So, would you like to enjoy some delicious cake? Despite repeatedly typoing the word "the" while writing the script, I was not a heavy internet user in 2008. I was a normal 7-year-old. My first exposure to the social internet was using my parents' computer without permission and being traumatized by a YouTube poop. When said parents eventually gave me a computer of my own, it was with strict parental controls. One of only a handful of whitelisted websites was Pokemon.com, spelled without the accent mark. This, probably unbeknownst to my parents, eventually included the Pokemon trading card game online forums, which launched when I was 10 years old and miraculously have not yet gone offline as of this video's production. This forum would be my second exposure to the social internet. I couldn't make an account, but I could read other people's posts, lurkers of the world unite, etc, etc. I remember seeing someone's signature with an image that looked something like this, paired with the note, "If you don't know what a meme is, you might not understand." And I didn't. At age 12, I got access to YouTube, and I naturally gravitated toward videos about Pokemon. In 2013, many YouTubers who made videos about Pokemon didn't make videos about anything except Pokemon. In search of novelty within this niche, many turned to the ROM hacking scene as a rich vein of content. Let's plays of Pokemon ROM hacks were unavoidable, and many of these hacks dived headfirst into full-on T-for-teen subject matter. Pokemon Snakewood rewrites Ruby version to be about zombies. You can get the leftovers item just 15 minutes into the game by looting a corpse. Meanwhile, Pokemon My Ass version is a game of Russian roulette where pressing the A button gives you either a line of dialogue from Pokemon Fire Red or a joke written by a 12-year-old who just learned a new word and is very excited to share. My Ass version feels like those things you do when you're just learning how ROM hacking works and testing out the tools, except someone just kept doing it until they realized they'd made a full hack. Going back to these works was thoroughly underwhelming, a few clearly amateur projects from a scene that would go on to bigger and much more elaborate things. Occasionally I did admit to myself that seeing the words Deep Throat Volcano inside a game that's more familiar to me than several close relatives was maybe at least slightly amusing. In 2013, good god, I fucking hated this shit. By age 12, I had shifted from kid who likes kid stuff to kid who likes kid stuff and also desperately wants to feel like an adult. I'd heard that one C.S. Lewis quote several times and always thought to myself, yeah man, that is so true. I registered this apparent need to turn Pokemon into something quote-unquote mature as rooted in insecurity. These hackers, YouTubers, and commenters were showing their entire ass, and I was not about to let them show mine. Looking back, I can't fully disagree with my younger self's assessment, though I was also hardcore projecting. My first real experience with cringe was, interestingly, me cringing at the thought that someone else like me was cringing. With this inoculation into the internet tradition of getting mad at people you don't know for no good reason, I set out on a mission to acquire as much cringe as one kid can. YouTube recommended me a video about Mario being a communist, and there was no turning back. I once showed CinemaSins to my mom. I was there for every upload from every creator now looked down upon by your average video essay watcher. And all of this was mere preparation for my crowning achievement when, at age 14, less than a year after the release of Super Smash Bros. 4, I joined Reddit. The word irony, as it's used on the internet, isn't the same as the word you might have learned in 6th grade language arts class. The two are homonyms. It's not saying one thing and meaning the opposite, it's saying one thing and who knows what the fuck you mean. It's not exactly new to point out that modern internet humor doesn't make any sense. Curiously, you most often hear this claim not from baby boomers, but from young people who pride themselves on understanding said humor. If you've seen some image like this, it probably wasn't on its own, but in a context like this. It's not a piece of indecipherable esoteric comedy, it's a joke about how modern jokes are supposedly hard to understand. The main mechanism of so-called irony on social media is to define in-groups and out-groups. If you don't know what a meme is, you might not understand. We've learned this behavior as a survival instinct. On the internet, there will always be someone who rudely disagrees with anything you express. The fact that anyone can handle being on social media at all is a testament to the adaptability of the human brain. If you live in a bubble on a website like Twitter, it's not that you're avoiding criticism, that's impossible. It's just that you've convinced yourself and your inner circle that the critics just don't get it. Similarly, ironic detachment is just a means of convincing yourself that critics just don't get the joke. It's a blindfold, not a shield. And if you're, say, a high school kid with a sea of mental health issues who already struggles with honestly expressing his emotions, that might have a lot of appeal. Case in point, the general meme subreddit r/me_IRL, circa 2016-2017. Of all social media sites, Reddit is the most like a game. Every subreddit is a 24-hour competition for the top spot. This is a big part of how the culture of me_IRL developed. Many of the most popular posts were meta jokes about trying to post a popular meme. The subreddit was not defined by a particular topic or even an aesthetic, but by the culture itself. It was a genuine, self-sustaining online community. This most commonly manifested in impromptu word games. For instance, someone might make a post titled Dwayne the Cock Johnson, and it's Dwayne Johnson's head crudely photoshopped onto a chicken or something. Someone else might then post Dwayne the Clock Johnson, Dwayne the Out of Stock Johnson, and so on. Whether or not the jokes were funny was entirely irrelevant. The fun came from participation, whether through posting or simply scrolling. It was about feeling like part of a rapidly moving community. That's what irony is, the rapid establishment of subcultural norms for the purpose of building in-group cohesion. Ultimately, though, the core pillar of me_IRL, as with any communal meme-sharing platform, was relatability. It was, true to its name, a game to post the image that would make the most people look at it and go, yeah, that's me. And if you wanted to be relatable to teenagers on Reddit, there was really one hot subject. There's a paradox at play here. Being relatable requires genuine sincerity from both poster and reader, while the communal gameplay of me_IRL pushes toward abstraction. Giving hat tips to feeling unfulfilled in life or functioning poorly in social situations became in-jokes as cemented as posting the Wednesday frog every Wednesday. That's when you step back and realize these people had formed a community where talking about some of the most sensitive and taboo aspects of being a young person was not only accepted, but built into the core rules of social behavior. To anyone on the inside, yes, these were only jokes, this was just part of some game, but that doesn't mean they weren't true. I still can't quite pin down the psychological effect of having been submerged for so long in a digital pool of shared misery. In many ways, it did help me feel less alone. On the other hand, being confronted on the daily with the anxieties of thousands of faceless people wasn't exactly comforting. All of this may add context to the phenomenon of wholesome memes. The term wholesome meme didn't originate on Reddit, but upon its landing there, it near immediately became a pillar of the site's culture. It felt like a miracle cure to a culture of bleakness. To look at wholesome memes now with some years' distance is to step into a hell constructed out of Hallmark cards. At face value, the front page of a 2017 r/wholesome memes is almost indistinguishable from the types of images your mom puts on your Facebook wall 10 minutes after asking you how to post on someone's Facebook wall. It's pretty easy to make a wholesome meme. Follow along at home. Take a non-threatening cartoon drawing of a dog and add something generically heartwarming. Use a handwritten font for maximum sincerity. From here, you're well on your way to a few thousand upvotes. The definition of wholesome meme given by the subreddit in its early years includes the phrase, genuine human emotion. This definition is prescriptive. Its purpose is to explain to new users what type of posts they should be making. What does and doesn't count as genuine human emotion is enforced both democratically through the voting system and through moderation. Just as me_IRL is a competition to be the most relatable, wholesome memes is about being the most genuine. By their very nature, wholesome memes are always at least slightly insincere. Kind words are not brought on by any internal desire to be compassionate, but simply because it's how the game is played. As with me_IRL, that's the point. It creates an environment where kindness isn't emotionally vulnerable, but just optimal gameplay. If someone else sees you as being overly saccharine or, yes, cringeworthy, that makes them the worst type of person someone can be on Reddit. There's someone who doesn't get the joke. The wholesome gambit, as I call it, has increasingly become the engine behind how we live online. All communication is a game. Cultural norms are arbitrary. Irony and sincerity aren't opposing forces, but co-conspirators. We can't understand the Subspace Emissary without understanding our reactions to the passion of its fandom. Cringe culture is dead. 2008 is the new retro. These are truths constructed out of artifice, jokes we tell ourselves in order to make them true. It's but one facet of the internet generations realizing that we have the tools to create literally any culture we dream of. We can be free of judgment, free of embarrassment, free of cringe. All it takes is a new rule of the game. And by God, it's exhilarating. Have you ever committed a crime? Don't answer that out loud if you have some sort of smart home technology in your house. Have you ever robbed a bank? Like a real big bank? Have you ever robbed a casino? Do you own a big sack with a $sign printed on it, with 2 lines going through the S? Have you ever pirated a $200 textbook? Writing Smash Bros. Fanfiction as an adult in the post-cringe roaring 20s brings that exact experience into an area of slightly higher legal luminosity. Equipped with the Emperor's newest wardrobe of ironic detachment, the self-reflective force of nostalgia has Ocean's 11'd itself into the high-security vault containing the most precious of rose-tinted diamonds. Update your calendars, 2008 is back, baby. Why not engage meaningfully with the inherently collaborative process of storytelling? Change your LinkedIn profile pic to Haruhi Suzumiya. But isn't cringe only a symptom? Is the fear of childishness really something you can wave away with a wink and a joke? Personally, I believe that you should cringe at your old Pokemon fanfiction to the precise extent that it helps you write new, better Pokemon fanfiction. If all art is a token in a board game, can we meaningfully engage as audience critics and creators? We can spill out words like engage with media on its own terms, but aren't all our experiences mediated through our biases and subjectivities? Cringe culture is dead, provided that we believe it is. 2008 is dead, even if we try to bring it back. And believe me, I am still alive. Inside of you are 2 wolves. One wolf wants to write an intentionally bad novel-length fanfic loosely based on the plot of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate's World of Light. The other wolf enters incognito mode every time they Google the word Pikachu. One wolf always tells you if the other is telling the truth, the other wolf only speaks if you believe the first wolf is lying. In your hand is a gun, but instead of bullets, it's loaded with a third goddamn wolf. Do you pull the trigger? I don't know. What do you want me to say? Don't let the haters get to you? Respect fan works as legitimate artistic expression? Delete all your social media accounts? Maybe you should do at least some of those things, but you've heard it all before. All I'm left with is the cold, axiomatic truth that everyone is their genuine self all of the time. So those are my thoughts on the final boss of the Subspace Emissary.
The children are developing relationships with all these Pokemon creatures.